welcome back to We Need Space, a podcast about actual asexuality by an actual asexual. My name is Mag Piper, and as always, I will be your host. It's still Asexual Awareness Week. There's an entire week, and it's delightful. Make sure to keep an eye out for aphobes, because they are out in droves and with a vengeance. I still don't know what's so interesting about hating on people who are different from you online, but whatever. It's pretty easy to ignore idiots. I hope you're all excited. Today is the long-awaited Asexual History episode. I had a lot of fun doing research for this, and I'll be tweeting the links to all the resources I used in the episode. I'd like to start all the way back in 1644 with the Golden Orchid Society in China. Sounds crazy, right? The ace history goes back to the 17th century? Crazy, but true. The Golden Orchid Society was a group of women who didn't want to engage in relationships, either sexual or romantic, with men. It wasn't illegal for a woman to marry another woman, mostly just frowned upon, so the Golden Orchid Society took advantage of the culture's views of marriage and gender inequality to help women get out of marriages they didn't want. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, what does a group of lesbians have to do with asexuality? Well, for one, lesbians are awesome, so jot that down. For another, the society had a system in place for asexual and or aromantic women, too. In Chinese culture at the time, and perhaps even today, I didn't look it up, women styled their hair in different ways depending on their marital status. An unmarried woman would have her hair one way and change it when she got married. In the Golden Orchid Society, if an unmarried woman was uninterested in sexual or romantic relationships with anyone, she could have her hair styled like that of a married woman. These women were called self-combing and would often have ceremonies to celebrate that, often very similar to traditional marriage ceremonies at the time. That's not to say that the society had everything right. There were extreme consequences if the women married to other women engaged in sexual or romantic relationships with a man, or if a self-combing woman did the same. Often public humiliation and beatings. The Golden Orchid Society also didn't recognize transgender women, as a person assigned male at birth, dressing in feminine clothing and acting in a feminine way, was seen as a practice and not an identity. However, the Golden Orchid Society was extremely progressive for its time, and existed for over 300 years, until it was banned in 1949, when the society was associated with an attempt to overthrow the emperor. That's a pretty badass society, if you ask me. It's also evidence that asexuality isn't a new thing. This is the 21st century, and asexuality has been around since at least the 17th. How cool is that? Now we're going to jump to the 19th century, but just for a quick stop. There isn't much that I could find about asexuality in the 1800s. In 1869, Carl Maria Kurt Benny not only coined the terms homosexual and heterosexual in his pamphlets arguing against the Prussian sodomy laws, he also coined the term monosexual in reference to people who only masturbate. You go, Carl. In 1896, which makes for a nice number switch, that pleases me, Magnus Hirschfeld, a German sexologist. What kind of studies do you have to do to be a sexologist? Do I want to know? Wrote a pamphlet that mentioned people who lack sexual desire and related them to the concept anesthesia sexual. That sounds like a weird drug kink. No thanks, Magnus. Try again. Let's head on to the 1900s, starting in 1948 with the addition of the designation X on the Kinsey scale. For those of you who don't know, the Kinsey scale is a scale from 1 to 7, used to determine the level of sexual attraction to either gender. X was outside the scale, indicating no socio-sexual contacts or reactions. While that's not entirely accurate today, Alfred Kinsey and his belief that sexuality is fluid was definitely the father of the sexual revolution. Next up, we have Anton Szandor LaVey, whose name I probably mispronounced, and his 1969 work, The Satanic Bible, which states, quote, Satanism condones any type of sexual activity which properly satisfies your individual desires, be it heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, or even asexual, unquote. It's a non-traditional source, at least for me, but you know what? Still valid. A lot of stuff happened in the 1970s, but I won't hit it all, just the important bits, or the bits I think are important. In 1972, Lisa Orlando wrote the Asexual Manifesto, saying, quote, Asexual, as we use it, does not mean without sex, but relating sexually to no one, unquote. Another line reads, quote, asexuality is simply self-contained sexuality, unquote. Also in the 70s, 1977 to be exact, Myra Johnson wrote one of the first academic papers about asexuality. Her paper focused on asexual women, who she thought were being ignored by the sexual revolution that was occurring at the time, which makes sense because that's when the whole sexual liberation movement was going on, roughly. There were a couple of cults. It was weird. Moving on. In 1983, Paula Neurius published the first paper with empirical, or verifiable, data about asexuality, mostly concerning the correlation between asexuality and mental health. The study used a variant of Kinsey's model, which makes sense. Now let's jump forward another 10 years. In 1993, the book Boston Marriages, Romantic but Asexual Relationships Among Contemporary Lesbians by Esther D. Rothblum and Kathleen A. Brehony was released. What do you want to bet that Esther and Kathleen were some of those contemporary lesbians? No takers? Huh. In 1997, 3 things happened, 2 of which were actually important, and the third was just the advent of me. Boom. Anyways, activist Jim Sinclair claimed to be an asexual on their website with an essay entitled Personal Definitions of Sexuality, which was originally a response to a homework question in 1987. Also in 1997, Zoe O'Reilly published the article My Life as an Amoeba, which is a self-reflection on her sexuality. It's honestly a really powerful read. My personal favorite line is, quote, "Some might say that we aren't really asexual, we just want to think we are. Remember this quote, I think, therefore I am. Add a couple of words. I think I'm asexual, therefore I am." Unquote. I would suggest you all read it because it was a catalyst for one of the first online asexuality groups, Haven for the Human Amoeba, on Yahoo in 2000. In fact, after HHA, changes in the asexual community happened almost yearly. In 2001, David J. founded the Asexual Visibility and Education Network, or AVEN. Most of you will recognize it, as AVEN is the most prolific and well-known online asexual community worldwide. In 2002, New York passed the Sexual Orientation Non-Discrimination Act, which is currently the only piece of legislation that mentions asexuality in the world. In 2004, psychologist Anthony F. Bogart published a paper entitled Asexuality, Prevalence and Associated Factors in a National Probability Sample in the Journal of Sex Research. The New Scientist magazine dedicated an issue to asexuality in response to Bogart's paper. There was even an episode of The Sex Files about asexuality on the Discovery Channel. 2005 brought about the first book about asexuality, the name of which I cannot pronounce, and I'm not going to attempt to pronounce because it's in French and I can barely speak Spanish. The author was Geraldine Levy-Rich Jones, and you should look her up because she's pretty cool. 2005 also saw the beginnings of the ace ring, a black ring worn on the middle finger of the right hand, as an identifier of sexuality. I personally have been wearing an ace ring since 2016. In 2009, the San Francisco Pride Parade saw the first asexual entry into the American Pride Parade by community members of AVEN. The next year, 2010, the asexual pride flag was announced, consisting of 4 stripes, black, gray, white, and purple. The black stripe represents asexuality, the gray stripe represents gray aces and demisexuals, the white stripe represents allies, and the purple stripe represents community. Sarah Beth Brooks founded Asexual Awareness Week later that same year. Thank you, Sarah Beth. Ace Awareness Week is my favorite week. The 2012 World Pride in London held the first international asexual conference, which sounds pretty cool. Does anyone have a time machine? One of the biggest triumphs, in my humble opinion, was in 2013, when the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, or DSM-5, changed the definition of hypoactive sexual desire disorder to make an exception for people who self-identify as asexual. I also think it's silly that it took the world that long to stop classifying asexuality as a disorder, but whatever. What's done is done. The Invisible Orientation, An Introduction to Asexuality by Julie Sondra Decker was published in 2014, making it the first mainstream book about asexuality. I haven't read it, but it's on my list. In 2015, George Norman became Britain's first openly asexual parliamentary election candidate. Try saying that 10 times fast. Which is pretty darn cool. I don't know if he got elected, nor do I particularly care, but it's cool that he tried and was open about his sexuality. Lastly, in 2019, Yasmin Benoit hosted the first asexual-themed bar at Pride in London. Yasmin is honestly one of my heroes. Also in 2019, the governor of the state of Washington released a statement officially declaring that the state would officially recognize Asexual Awareness Week, and as far as I know, the first state to do so. As you can see, asexual history is long and diverse, almost 375 years in the making. Asexuality wasn't created by teenagers on Tumblr, and we've belonged in the LGBTQIA+ community as long as we've existed. Go forth, my ace friends. Spread awareness, spread acceptance, and spread confidence, both in yourself and in the hearts of other aces. We've been around a long time, and will continue to be around. Don't let the haters get to you. Wear your flags with pride, keep moving forwards, and love who you are. Thank you for popping by. Every listen, comment, and like really helps. If you can, feel free to buy me a coffee. The link is in the description as well as my Twitter bio. You can find that Twitter bio at needspacepod, or you can email me at weneedspace.podcast@gmail.com. The music I use is Mirror Mirror by Diamond Ortiz. This has been Mag Piper, and as always, thank you for listening.